In the grand hall of the Winter Palace, the Queen Mother presented a line of noble she-wolves to her son, the Alpha King. Each was a masterpiece of breeding and politics, but as he passed, his wolf stirred for the first time in years, not for a titled lady, but for the Omega maid scrubbing the floor. The gasps of the court were a death knell to the Queen's ambitions and the first shot in a war for the throne. The Winter Palace wasn't just a home. It was the strategic heart of an empire, where every mating was a treaty and every glance a negotiation. For decades, the Queen Mother had controlled this arena, securing power through her son's potential unions. But on this night, the king's primal instinct betrayed her carefully laid plans, igniting a silent, brutal civil war within the royal family itself. The question was no longer about whom he would choose, but who would survive the choice. Her name was Elara, and she was a ghost in her own life. For 3 years, she had scrubbed the Winter Palace's endless stone corridors as an unmarked Omega, a ward of the state with no family name or memory. The palace records listed her parents as casualties of the Northern Border Wars, a convenient statistic that erased any claim to lineage or protection. She slept in the underground dormitories with 40 other servants, her existence measured in shifts and silence. But Elara carried a secret even she didn't understand, a strange, dormant energy that sometimes made the palace's ancient silver inlays hum when she polished them. The man whose wolf had stirred for her was King Thuron, the 7th of his name. At 32, he was a ruler forged in war, having consolidated the fractured northern territories in a brutal 5-year campaign that ended just 2 winters past. His reign was stable, but his court was not. The aristocracy was divided between old bloodlines who traced power back centuries and new military allies Thuron had elevated. His mother, Queen Mother Isolde, was the undisputed leader of the old guard. For her, the king's mating wasn't about love or instinct. It was the final piece in a decades-long strategy to purge the court of his father's progressive influences and restore absolute control to the traditional families. She had already arranged the sudden retirement of 3 of his closest wartime advisors. The event in the Grand Hall was no spontaneous gathering. It was Isolde's masterstroke, meticulously planned for the night of the hunter's moon, when Wolf's senses were at their peak. She had invited daughters from 5 of the most powerful conservative houses, each vetted for political loyalty and genetic purity. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the subtle, aggressive pheromones of highborn alphas. Elara had been assigned to clean the gallery overlooking the hall, a task usually given to beaters. A senior maid had fallen ill. It was a cosmic accident that placed her directly in the scent path of the king's procession. When Thuron passed below, a tremor went through him. His wolf, which had been silent and distrustful since the war, didn't just stir, it roared to the surface. His gold eyes flashed, his head snapping toward the gallery railing. The entire court followed his gaze to the slight figure in grey, frozen with a polishing cloth in her hand. The silence that followed was more devastating than any shout. In that one unguarded reaction, Thuron had publicly undermined his mother's authority, humiliated 5 noble houses, and ignited a scandal that would ripple through every level of the empire. Queen Mother Isolde did not react with shock. Her face smoothed into an expression of glacial disapproval. She saw the threat with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just about an Omega, it was about her son's independence, a defiance she had not seen since his father's reign. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod to her head of household security, a grizzled alpha named Vorgen. Before the murmuring crowd could erupt into questions, the Omega was gone, escorted not back to the servants' quarters, but to a secure, windowless room in the palace's oldest wing, disappeared. The presentation continued, but the spell was broken. The king's jaw was set, his responses clipped. He left the hall early, his personal guard, a unit of loyalists from his war days, forming a tense perimeter around him. That night 2 powers began to move in the dark. Isolde summoned the heads of the 5 noble houses to her private solar. No records were kept, but servants reported the scent of fear and expensive brandy until dawn. The offer, or rather the threat, was clear. Stand with her against this instability, and their positions would be secured. Betray her, and their families would find their trading licenses revoked, and their sons assigned to distant, frozen outposts. She was drawing a line in the sand of the palace itself. Meanwhile, Thuron ordered his spymaster, a beta named Kale, to pull every record on the Omega servant. What returned was a file of disturbing contradictions. Ilara's intake papers listed her as 6 years old at the time of the border wars, found alone and mute near a demolished village. Yet the medical examination noted no physical trauma and her vocal cords were intact. The orphanage that raised her reported episodes where she would sleepwalk and recite complex historical treatises in a dead language. Most chilling of all, a single unsigned note was paperclipped to the back of the file, dated from 10 years prior. It read, "Subject's biometrics show anomalous resonance with royal bloodline markers. Recommend continued observation. Do not integrate into general population." The order had been ignored, lost in bureaucratic chaos. Someone had known Ilara was different and had hidden her in plain sight. By the next morning, the palace was a cage of whispers. The official story from the Queen Mother's staff was that the king had experienced a momentary fatigue, a residual stress from his campaigns. The Omega servant had been transferred to a distant estate for specialized training, a benevolent act. But in the servants' passages, a different story spread. They said the king had sent his personal physician to the old wing. They said the head of household security, Vorjan, had been seen entering the Queen Mother's chambers with a report, not a request. The power struggle had begun not with a shout, but with a disappearance. And Thuron, the warrior king who had never lost a battle, now faced an enemy he could not fight with claws, his own mother, who had just taken the one thing his wolf had claimed as its own. King Thuron did not request an audience with his mother. He stormed her private solar as dawn broke. The 2 alpha guards at her door, men loyal to her house, not the crown, stepped forward but faltered under the raw, predatory dominance rolling off their king. He pushed past them without a word. Queen Mother Isolde was seated at her escritoire, reviewing correspondence, her expression one of mild annoyance at the interruption. The scene was a calculated display of normalcy. "Thuron, darling. You look unrested." "Where is she?" His voice was a low growl, the wolf still too close to the surface. "The servant, she is being cared for, far from the distractions of the court. Her effect on you was concerning. The stability of the throne cannot be shaken by a domestic anomaly." Isolde's tone was soothing, logical, the voice that had guided him through his first years of rule. But now, it felt like a velvet-wrapped leash. "My wolf recognized its mate. That is not an anomaly. It is the highest law of our kind." Thuron's hands clenched at his sides. "You will produce her, now." Isolde set down her pen, the click echoing in the quiet room. "The highest law? You speak of fairy tales for common wolves. You are a king. Your first law is to your kingdom. That girl is a political grenade. Her origins are obscure. Her presentation is a mystery. To acknowledge her would be to tell every noble house that their generations of loyalty, their pure bloodlines, mean less than a scullery maid's scent. They would revolt." "Let them try," Thuron said, his gold eyes flashing. "They already are." Isolde stood, walking to the window overlooking the palace grounds. "While you were brooding, the Duke of Marcellus, the Earl of Thorn, and 3 other house heads formally withdrew from tonight's trade council. They cite uncertain leadership as their reason. The river grain tariffs, the ones that feed the northern armies, will not be renewed. Your soldiers will go hungry by winter because you glanced at a maid." She turned back to him, her own eyes sharp. "This is the game, Thuron. Not war on a battlefield, but war in ledgers and salons, and you have just handed every piece to your enemies." Thuron felt the trap tighten. His mother wasn't just hiding Ilara, she was using her as the trigger for a financial and political siege, one designed to force him back into line. To rescue the Omega, he would have to first save his kingdom from collapse. It was a masterful, vicious play. He left the Solar without another word, his mind racing. He couldn't attack his mother directly without sparking civil war. He needed leverage. His spymaster, Kale, was waiting in the war room, a converted armory deep beneath the palace that was loyalist territory. The beta's usual calm was gone, replaced by focused intensity. The file was a decay, sire. The real records were purged, but they left a ghost in the system. Kale pulled up a holographic interface, displaying a labyrinth of data pathways. "Every palace record is backed up in a closed-loop archive, a failsafe from your father's time. It takes a royal biometric to access." "I found a cluster of files related to Project Aegis that were accessed the night of the border wars, the same night Ilara was found." Thuron placed his hand on the scanner. The system chimed, and a new stream of encrypted files unfolded. Project Aegis was not an orphanage program. It was a covert biological research initiative, authorized by his father, King Alastair, and shut down by Isolde immediately after his death. The goal: to study a rare genetic mutation in Omega wolves that purportedly allowed them to harmonize and, in theory, neutralize the aggressive dominance waves of rival alphas. It was a peacekeeping project, born from Alastair's idealistic reforms. The test subjects were children from families displaced by the very border wars. Ilara was Subject 0. The final report was chilling. It stated that while the mutation was real, its effects were unpredictable and potent. An Omega with a fully activated Harmony gene could unintentionally pacify an entire pack, not through dominance, but through a subconscious empathic broadcast that soothed the inner wolf. To the old guard, who believed power was rooted in aggressive alpha dominance, such an ability was heretical, a weapon that could dismantle the social hierarchy from the bottom up. The recommendation from the lead scientist, a doctor named Aris, was to place the subjects in controlled, observant environments until their maturity. Isolde's handwritten note on the termination order read, "Seal the records, disperse the subjects. The throne is built on strength, not serenity." Ilara hadn't been lost in bureaucracy. She had been hidden. Her strange episodes, her resonance with royal blood markers, it was all the dormant gene expressing itself in fragments. And Thuron's wolf, a creature of immense power but also profound in a conflict from the wars, hadn't just scented a mate. It had scented its only possible source of true peace. His mother knew, she had always known. And now she had the living key to his sanity locked in a box. Meanwhile, in the cold, stone room, Ilara was waking up to a different reality. The space was not a cell. It was a lavishly appointed sitting room, but every window was bricked over and the only door was reinforced steel. A polite, silent beta woman brought her meals. Books were provided. It was a gilded cage. At first, Ilara was simply terrified. Then, as days passed, a deep, unfamiliar anger began to simmer. Her wolf, always a faint whisper, was now a constant, restless presence. The forced isolation, the suppression, was acting like a pressure cooker on her latent abilities. During one of the beta attendants' visits, Ilara felt a surge of frustration. She didn't shout, she just thought, "Leave me alone." To her shock, the woman stopped, her eyes glazing over slightly, turned and walked out, forgetting to leave the tray. Ilara had pacified a beta's simple will without a sound. The power both thrilled and terrified her. She began to experiment, focusing her emotions on the silver lock of the door. She didn't try to break it. She imagined it calming, stilling, becoming inert. A low, resonant hum filled the room, and the complex locking mechanism simply disengaged with a soft click. She was free to walk into the outer guard chamber. 2 Alpha guards, Vorgen's men, sat at a table. They looked up, startled. Ilara, heart-pounding, projected a wave of pure, soothing calm. "Everything is fine, you see nothing." The guards' aggressive postures relaxed. One even smiled vaguely. "You should probably be in your room, miss," one said, his voice drowsy. "I am," Ilara whispered, and walked past them into the empty corridor. For the first time, she wasn't a ghost. She was a phantom, moving unseen through the palace's servant passages, her new ability creating a bubble of passivity around her. She didn't run for the gates. She went searching for answers, drawn instinctively toward the one place she'd felt a connection, the King's Wing. Thuron and Kale were closing in from the other direction. Cross-referencing the Project Aegis files with old palace blueprints, Kale pinpointed several observation suites built during Alastair's reign. One was in the oldest wing, exactly where servants had reported Vorgen going. Thuron moved with a small team of his most trusted war comrades, bypassing the Queen's Guard by using forgotten passages built for servants. They found the outer guard chamber first. The 2 guards were asleep at their table, looking oddly peaceful. The door to the sitting room was ajar, empty. "She's gone," Thuron growled, a mix of panic and pride surging in him. Then a soft sound came from a shadowed alcove down the hall. Ilara stood there, her grey servant's dress blending with the stone, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a fierce, luminous understanding. "They hid me," she said, her voice clear. "They hid what I am, what you are." Thuron approached slowly, his men hanging back. The moment he entered her space, the frantic, war-torn rage that was his constant companion quieted. It was like stepping out of a hurricane into eye of the storm. His wolf lay down, content. "I know now too," he said, "and I am sorry." Their moment was shattered by the sound of booted feet. Vorjan and a full squad of the Queen's Guard rounded the corner, weapons drawn. Vorjan's eyes narrowed, seeing the escaped Omega and the king together. "Your Majesty," Vorjan said, his tone devoid of respect. "The Queen Mother requests your presence, and the servant must be returned to confinement. She is a danger to herself." Thuron stepped in front of Ilara. "Stand down, Commander, by my order." Vorjan didn't flinch. "My orders come from the Regent Matriarch, per the Regency Act of your accession. In matters of internal palace security and bloodline integrity, her authority is absolute. Do not make me enforce it." The guards leveled their rifles, loaded with silver nickel rounds designed to incapacitate wolves. This was the open breach. His mother had anticipated his move and given Vorjan legal cover to defy him. Thuron could fight, but it would mean Kingsguard killing Kingsguard in the halls. It would be the first battle of the Civil War, and it would start with him looking like a tyrant attacking guards to protect a fugitive servant. He saw the trap, yet again. Ilara felt his dilemma, felt the violent tension in the alphas around her. Without thinking, she stepped out from behind Thuron. She didn't address Vorjan. She looked at the young guards, their knuckles white on their rifles, their sense sharp with fear and aggression. She opened herself, not with a command, but with an offering, a broadcast of profound calm, of safety, of home. The harmony gene activated not as a weapon, but as a blanket. The effect was instantaneous. The guards' aggressive stances softened, their grips loosened. One yawned. Vorjan, a hardened alpha, resisted, shaking his head like a bull. "What is this? Witchcraft?" But his men were lowering their weapons, looking confused and peaceful. "It's not witchcraft," Thuron said, his voice ringing with authority. "It is the legacy of my father, a gift you were ordered to destroy. Now you will stand aside." This time Vorjan was alone. He snarled but stepped back, his face a mask of fury. Thuron took Ilara's hand and led her away, his loyalists forming a rear guard. But the victory was fleeting. By noon, the story had been twisted and leaked. The official bulletin from the Queen Mother's office reported that the unstable Omega servant had used forbidden psychic abilities to assault palace guards and bewitch the king, necessitating a full lockdown. The narrative was set. Ilara was no longer just a scandal. She was a dangerous, seditious weapon. Isolde had lost the physical battle, but won the propaganda war. She had given the noble houses the enemy they needed, a common, magical foe that threatened their very biology. That night, as Thuron sheltered Ilara in the secured royal apartments, a package arrived for him. It contained no note. Inside was a single, dried winter rose and a spent silver-nickel rifle cartridge. It was a message he understood perfectly. The next attack would not be with legal paperwork or guards. It would be with a sniper's bullet. The war had just turned hot. The sniper's threat was a declaration. Queen Mother Isolde was no longer playing a political game. She was executing a coup. Thuron's response was immediate and militaristic. He declared the royal apartments a secure fortress, staffed only by warriors from his northern campaigns who had sworn blood oaths. Ilara was given a suite adjacent to his, connected by a door that was never locked. The bond between them, now acknowledged, began to deepen with terrifying speed. Her proximity acted as a balm, but it also sharpened his focus. The frantic, war-weary king was gone, replaced by a calculating, ruthless strategist. His first move was not against his mother, but against her money. Isolde's power was funded by two things: the tithes from the 5 loyalist noble houses and her personal control of the Azure Trading Consortium, a merchant guild that held a monopoly on luxury imports. Thuron, using emergency wartime powers from his campaign that had never been formally rescinded, signed a royal decree. He nationalized the consortium, placing it under crown control pending an audit for irregularities detrimental to state security. It was a financial decapitation strike. Overnight, Isolde's private coffers were frozen, and the flow of jewels, information, and mercenary payments through her networks stuttered to a halt. The backlash was volcanic. The Duke of Marcellus, Isolde's staunchest ally, openly accused the king of tyranny on the floor of the High Council. Thuron did not defend himself. He simply had Kale play a recorded intercept. The Duke's voice, crisp and clear, arranging for the diversion of river grain shipments to his private granaries, starving the northern garrisons as per the matriarch's design. The council hall fell into a stunned silence. Thuron looked at the duke. "You speak of tyranny while plotting treason. Your house is hereby attainted. Your lands are forfeit to the crown." The duke was dragged out by Thuron's guards. The message was clear. Thuron would not just fight, he would dismantle them brick by brick. While Thuron waged economic war, Ilara was wagging an internal one. Confined but not idle, she demanded access to the Project Aegis files. With Kale's help, she found the personal research journals of Dr. Aris. The entries painted a picture far more complex than a simple peace project. Aris believed the Harmony gene wasn't just a pacifier. In its mature, activated state, it could allow an Omega to do something unprecedented, to amplify the power of a bonded mate, creating a synergistic loop where the Alpha's strength was enhanced, not subdued, because the inner wolf was finally at peace. The Omega became a living catalyst. The final journal entry, scribbled hastily, contained a staggering hypothesis. Aris speculated that if such a bonded pair were to perform the ancient royal rite of concord during a lunar eclipse, their joined power could resonate with the land itself, creating a permanent, stable field that would secure a dynasty for generations. It was the ultimate rebuttal to Isolde's claim that Ilara made Thuron weak. She could make him invincible. But the journal ended there. The next page was torn out. Kale, digging deeper into the palace's structural archives, found why. The Rite of Concord required a specific location, the Sunken Temple, a sacred site beneath the palace foundations, built by the first king. It had been sealed by order of Queen Mother Isolde 15 years ago, after the accidental death of King Alastair. The connection was a lightning bolt. Isolde hadn't just shut down Project Aegis, she had physically sealed away the place where its ultimate promise could be realized. She knew the potential, and she buried it. Ilara, armed with this knowledge, began to practice. With Thuron's patient presence as an anchor, she learned to not just broadcast calm, but to focus it, to direct the harmonic energy. In a controlled test with one of Thuron's most battle-scarred captains, a man plagued by violent nightmares, she didn't just soothe him. She gently guided his wolf to confront the trauma, leaving the soldier weeping with relief. The potential was staggering. But each use drained her, and the more she used her gift, the more her own latent memories, suppressed by years of conditioning, began to surface. She remembered a woman with kind eyes singing to her, a man with Thuron's jawline lifting her onto his shoulders, and the smell of smoke and silver. She was not a random orphan. She was connected to the royal line, a discarded branch pruned by Isolde's ambition. Isolde, reeling from the financial strike and the loss of the Duke, changed tactics. She weaponized the one thing she still controlled completely, tradition and superstition. Through a network of palace Omegas and beta attendants loyal to her, a new story began to spread. It wasn't just that Ilara was a bewitching sorceress. The rumor claimed she was a Blight Omega, a cursed figure from old legends whose bond would not bring strength, but would instead drain the Alpha King's vitality, sicken the land, and leave the kingdom vulnerable to its enemies. To support this, a mysterious illness began to sweep through the palace's kennels, killing prized hunting hounds. Poison was suspected, but no proof was found. The superstitious court, already unnerved, began to look at Ilara with terror, not curiosity. Thuron knew he had to break this narrative publicly and decisively. He announced a royal audience, a tradition where the king hears petitions from common citizens. He would hold it in the great courtyard, with Ilara seated openly beside him on a second, lower throne, a bold, nearly unheard of honor for an unmated Omega. It was a direct challenge to his mother's propaganda. He was betting everything that Ilara's natural presence would win the people over, proving she was a blessing, not a blight. The day arrived, cold and bright. Thousands gathered. Isolde watched from a secluded balcony. As Thuron and Ilara took their seats, a wave of unease passed through the crowd. Ilara, feeling the weight of their fear and suspicion, began to quietly emanate a gentle, reassuring calm, letting it wash over the front ranks of petitioners. It worked. Hostile murmurs softened. An old farmer who came to complain about taxes, upon reaching the dais, found himself tearfully speaking of his granddaughter instead. His anger melted away. Then the fifth petitioner stepped forward. It was a middle-aged beta woman dressed in the humble clothes of a seamstress. She bowed, then looked directly at Ilara, her voice ringing out. "I come not for myself, but to thank the king's companion. My son serves in the north. He wrote to me that for the first time since the wars he is sleeping through the night. He says a new peace sits on the wind. He does not know why, but I do. The stories are wrong. You are not a blight. You are the remedy." She then turned and addressed the crowd. "She heals what the war broke." A ripple of shock, then a growing murmur of agreement spread through those who had felt Ilara's subtle influence. Isolde, on her balcony, saw her narrative crumbling. Her face remained impassive, but her knuckles were white on the railing. She gave a slight nod to Vorgen, who stood obscured in a guard tower. As the seamstress stepped back, a sudden sharp asterisk crack echoed across the courtyard. A silver nickel round meant for Thuron's head instead struck the newly installed transparent shield of bulletproof polymer his engineers had fitted to the dais. The shield starred but held. Chaos erupted, screams, guards surging. In the frantic scramble, a second shot was fired. This one struck the seamstress who had spoken, killing her instantly. The assassination attempt had failed, but the massacre had succeeded. The courtyard became a scene of terror and blood. As guards sealed the gates, Thuron, shielding Ilara with his body, looked up to the guard tower. It was empty, but left behind on the sill was another winter rose. The message was now even clearer. "I can reach anyone, anywhere. I will kill your people to break you." The public victory had turned into a horrific tragedy. Isolde had demonstrated that she would spill innocent blood in the streets to maintain control. The incident, which she publicly decried as a tragic attack by unknown insurgents, had the desired effect. The court was now paralyzed by fear. Support for Thuron's defiance wavered. The price of his romance was too high. That night, a despondent Thuron faced his war council. They were losing. Public opinion was shifting back out of terror. His economic moves had stalled Isolde, but not broken her. And now, she had shown a willingness to escalate to outright terrorism. "We are in a siege with no walls," one of his captains said. "She will pick off our support until we stand alone." It was Ilara, silent until then, who spoke. Her eyes were dry, hardened by the day's horror. "She fights with fear and lies. We have been playing her game on her board." She placed Dr. Aris's journal on the table, open to the page about the sunken temple. "She sealed this place because she is afraid of it, afraid of the truth it represents, not just about me, but about your father's vision. We don't need to win her game. We need to change it entirely. We must perform the rite." Kale shook his head. "The temple is sealed behind 3-meter-thick stone, warded with silver. It's in the heart of the old palace, surrounded by her guard." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Thuron's face. "Then we don't go through her guards or her doors." He pointed to an architectural schematic. The sunken temple wasn't just below the palace. Its farthest chamber abutted an ancient, forgotten aqueduct, a system that ran outside the walls, a system his engineers had mapped during the war for contingency plans. "We go under her. We break her seal not with force, but by fulfilling the rite she tried to erase. We show the kingdom what true strength looks like." The plan was insane, a subterranean infiltration into the most sacred, guarded site in the realm. Failure meant death or being branded as sacrilegious desecrators, but it was the only move left. They would not confront the Queen Mother in the halls of power she controlled. They would strike at the foundation of her legitimacy itself, in the holy dark where kings were made. The counter-coup began not with a shout, but with the silent, determined slide of a manhole cover in a derelict courtyard. As the king, his Omega, and his most loyal warriors descended into the belly of the earth. The aqueduct was a tomb of black water and echoing silence. Thuron led, with Ilara close behind, her hand in his. Kale and 5 of the king's most trusted warriors followed, their lights cutting through the oppressive dark. The stone was ancient, marked with symbols that predated the current dynasty. The air grew colder, charged with a static that made the hairs on their arms stand up. After an hour of wading through icy, chest-high water, they reached a wall. Not natural stone, but fitted blocks sealed with a mortar mixed with silver dust, Isolde's work. Thuron's engineer, a compact woman named Rhea, placed small charges with precise, careful hands. "The shockwave will be contained, but the sound will travel. We'll have minutes at most once we breach." The explosion was a dull thud that echoed down the tunnels. The wall crumbled inward, revealing not a temple, but a long-forgotten antechamber. The air that rushed out was dry and carried the scent of ozone and old incense. They stepped into a circular space, their lights illuminating towering statues of the first kings and queens, their eyes inlaid with moonstones that glimmered in the beams. At the center of the room was a stone dais, and above it, a shaft in the ceiling that opened to the night sky. The lunar eclipse was beginning, the moon slowly being swallowed by the Earth's shadow. But they were not alone. As they moved toward the dais, a section of the wall slid open. Vorgen stood there, with 10 of the Queen's Guard, all in full combat gear. They had anticipated the back door. "The matriarch sends her regards," Vorgen growled, raising his rifle. "She thought you might try something sacrilegious." Thuron didn't order his men to attack. He looked at Elara and gave a slight nod. This was the test. She closed her eyes, not broadcasting a blanket of calm, but focusing it like a lance. She pictured the bond between her and Thuron, not as a tether, but as a conduit. She pushed her harmony, her peace, through it and into him, then amplified it outward, targeting the aggressive intent of Vorgen's men. The effect was not drowsiness. It was a profound, disorienting wave of certainty, the certainty that violence here was wrong, a violation of sacred ground. The guards hesitated, their weapons dipping. Vorgen roared, shaking his head, fighting the influence. "Stand fast." But Elara wasn't finished. Drawing on the temple's own latent energy, she amplified her broadcast further. The moonstones in the statue's eyes began to glow with a soft, blue-white light. The guards, one by one, dropped to their knees, not in submission, but in awe, overwhelmed by a sense of ancestral presence. Vorgen alone remained standing, teeth gritted, but he could not raise his weapon. The temple itself was rejecting his violence. "Stand down, Commander," Thuron said, his voice resonating with a new, layered authority. "This ends now." Vorgen, defeated not by force, but by truth, finally lowered his head. With the path clear, Thuron and Elara stepped onto the dais. As the eclipse reached totality, plunging the world into an eerie copper darkness, they performed the rite of concord. There were no grand words. Thuron simply placed his forehead against Elara's, their hands clasped. He allowed his wolf, his power, his fears, and his hopes to flow openly to her. She, in turn, opened the full channel of her harmony gene, not to suppress, but to receive, harmonize, and amplify. The energy that had been a trickle became a torrent. A visible pulse of silver and gold light erupted from them, shooting up the shaft to the eclipsed moon, and then radiating outward in a wave across the kingdom. In the palace above, the effect was instantaneous and physical. Every wolf, alpha, beta, and omega felt a sudden, profound calm, a clarity of purpose. The pervasive anxiety that had gripped the court evaporated. In the gardens, winter roses inexplicably bloomed. In the kennels, the sick hounds whined and then stood, healed. Queen Mother Isolde, in her solar, felt it as a cold dread. The bond she shared with her son, long strained, didn't just sever, it was gently, irrevocably replaced by a new, dominant harmony that rejected her discord. Her power, which was rooted in fear and division, withered in the face of this unifying truth. She knew she had lost. Thuron and Elara emerged from the temple not through the aqueduct, but through its main entrance, the great sealed doors now lying shattered outward. They walked hand in hand up the grand processional stairs into the heart of the palace, followed by their loyalists and a subdued Vorgen. They were met not by guards, but by a gathering crowd of servants, courtiers, and nobles, all drawn by the pulse of power and the sudden change in the air. No one dared to stop them. They found Isolde in the throne room, standing before the empty seat. She looked older, her composure cracked. "You have defiled our most sacred laws," she said, but her voice lacked its former conviction. "We have fulfilled them," Thuron replied, his voice carrying to the back of the hall. "You ruled through fear and called it strength. You hid a gift and called it a threat. Your reign ends now." He did not depose her with violence. He simply stated a fact that the entire kingdom now felt. "You will retire to the summer villa under guard. You will have comfort but no influence. The Regency Act is hereby dissolved." Isolde opened her mouth to protest, but then she looked at Elara. In the Omega's eyes, she didn't see triumph or hatred. She saw pity and an immense, unshakable peace. That was the final defeat. Isolde bowed her head once and allowed Vorgen, now following Thuron's orders, to escort her from the room. In the days that followed, the changes were swift and profound. Thuron publicly revealed the truth of Project Aegis and his father's vision. Ilara's status was formalized not just as his mate, but as co-regent, her harmony gene recognized as a national treasure. The noble houses that had opposed them, their leaders stripped of their conspiratorial zeal by the right's wave, swore new oaths of loyalty. The Duke of Marcellus was exiled, his lands redistributed to the soldiers who had been starved. The kingdom entered an era of stability unseen in generations. But the final surprise came from the palace archives. With Isolde's influence gone, a sealed testament from King Alastair was found. In it, he confessed a secret. Ilara was not just a subject of Project Aegis. She was his illegitimate granddaughter, the child of his disgraced younger son who had fallen in love with a low-born Omega carrying the rare gene. Isolde, to protect the purity of the royal line, had orchestrated the couple's disappearance during the border wars and had the child placed in the project, hoping the gene would remain dormant. Ilara was not a random orphan. She was the last living descendant of Alastair's bloodline, making her bond with Thuron not a scandal, but a reunification of the dynasty. She had a right to the throne by blood as well as by bond. A year later, on the anniversary of the rite, Thuron and Ilara stood together on the same dais in the sunken temple, now restored and open. The kingdom was at peace, its borders secure, its people prosperous. The power struggle that began with a glance in the grand hall had ended not with a victor and a vanquished, but with a harmony that resonated through every wolf in the land. Ilara, the Omega Maid, had become the foundation of a new kind of strength. And Thuron, the warrior king, had learned that true power wasn't in dominating others, but in finding the one who could calm the storm inside him. Together, they had rewritten the rules of an empire. The story of the she-wolves and the scrub maid was over. The story of the harmonious reign had just begun. So what does the story of Thuron and Ilara truly teach us? On the surface, it's a classic fantasy, a king, a maid, a wicked queen mother, but dig deeper and it reveals a brutal, elegant truth about power itself. For generations, the kingdom believed strength was a singular force, the sharpest claw, the loudest roar, the most unbreakable will. Queen Mother Isolde was the master of that old world. She understood its politics, its prejudices, its ledger books. And by all its metrics, she was right. Ilara was a terrible choice. She offered no alliance, no wealth, no conventional advantage. Isolde wasn't just being cruel, she was being a consummate politician protecting the system that made her. But the system was broken. It produced kings like Thuron, victorious in battle but hollowed out by war, ruling through trauma rather than vision. It required constant conflict, internal and external, to sustain itself. What Ilara represented, and what Isolde fought so viciously to destroy, was an existential threat to that entire model. Her harmony gene proposed a radical alternative, that the ultimate strength might not be in dominating others, but in achieving perfect internal balance. That a kingdom's health might be measured not by the fear it inspires, but by the peace it cultivates. This is why their conflict was so ferocious. It wasn't just a family feud over girlfriend. It was a civil war between two competing definitions of reality. Isolde's world was hierarchical, transactional, and rigid. Thuron and Ilara's world, unlocked by the rite of concord, was networked, synergistic, and fluid. Her power subtracted from others to grow. Their power multiplied when shared. The lingering question for us isn't about werewolf politics. It's about our own systems. We all have our own winter palaces, institutions, families, workplaces, governed by outdated rules and defended by modern-day Isoldes who mistake control for stability. We've been taught that to be strong is to be hard, to be invulnerable, to never show the scent of need. But what if the real revolution, the real power, lies in daring to recognize what truly harmonizes us? What if our greatest weakness is the very thing that can heal the fractures around us? Ilara didn't win by becoming a better schemer than Isolde. She won by changing the game entirely. She refused to fight on the battlefield of status and shame. Instead, she unveiled a deeper, older truth that rendered those weapons meaningless. In the end, the Queen Mother wasn't defeated by an army. She was made irrelevant by a new paradigm. Their story is a reminder that the most profound shifts often begin not with a challenge to authority, but with a simple, undeniable truth that authority cannot comprehend. A glance across a crowded room, a whisper of instinct, the courage to trust a connection that makes no political sense. because it makes every other kind of sense. That is how dynasties fall and new ones are born, not always with a war, but sometimes with a harmony. If you found this tale of primal instincts and political upheaval compelling, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, it truly helps the channel. Share this with someone who loves stories where the underdog doesn't just win, but changes the rules of the game. And subscribe to the channel, ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the hidden architectures of power, love, and destiny. Let me know in the comments, in your own life, are you playing Isolde's game or are you searching for your own right of concord? Thanks for watching.